Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to observe and summarize the whole situation along the front in the Ukraine-Russia war and finish up with some question and answers. If you want to ask questions, don't forget to tag the channel so the mods can transfer the questions and I can easily answer them. We are starting with the Eastern Front. I will call this from now on the Eastern Front as the two fronts are merging. The Ukrainians have almost reached the Donbas here. This is Luhansk, which is part of the Donbas. So it just makes sense to turn the Donbas front to extend it further. There are likely further Ukrainian attacks happening east of Sviatohirsk, but so far there is no more breakthrough. There are also not really any more proofs of not any more signs of their advance. Liman, which is here, is seemingly still in Russian hands. I have not seen any proof that it changed hands. It seems to be under attack. That show the Russian Telegram channels report further Ukrainian attacks and that the Ukrainians are gathering reinforcements. But as of now, Liman seems to still be holding. I have here, this is an example from, now I have a video from Bilohorivka. It is unclear, though, if the town is actually under Ukrainian control. This is the street sign. Bilohorivka is, there's combat happening around it. That's the latest report. This is here in this part. The Ukrainians, thus, the pictures seem to prove it, have reached the town, which means they actually went on the offensive towards Lysychansk. But as of now, I can't confirm that it's under Ukrainian control again. Russian military bloggers are now saying that the Ukrainians have actually crossed the Oskil towards Borova here. But I have, again, no proof whatsoever in the terms of the Russians themselves claiming they conquered something. I've seen no credible Ukrainian claims, let alone pictures or videos proving that they have actually conquered something on this side. They might just be recon units as of now, but there seems to now finally be some Ukrainian activity east of the Oskil. We might see the offensive getting steam again within the next 24 to 48 hours, as it should be far too early for accumulation of the Ukrainian offensive, but as of now they took an operational pause. And while they took the operational pause, obviously the Russian side had the chance to reinforce and entrench themselves, but the time frame seems far too short for the Russians to actually having built a credible defensive line east of the Oskil. Those what you see here on the map seem to be more or less fantasy. I have still not a single report that is credible of Ukrainians crossing the Oskil towards the east at Kupiansk. I have the interesting, though, is the map, what we have here about the Donbas itself. This map is from Raiba, which is one of the big pro-Russian propaganda channels. As you can see, highly professionally well-made maps showing Ukrainian attacks both in the north and in the south of the area south of the Siversky Donetsk, which we can see here. So seemingly the Ukrainians actually advanced somewhat in the direction of Spirne, east to it, but no breakthroughs yet. South and southeast of Bakhmut, there are further advances. The Russians say they gained a little ground. They say Wagner, we see that here. Wagner has captured Mikhailivka Druha, which is here. In past status situation reports, I reported Kodema now seemingly being under Wagner control, so that would kind of make sense that they advanced further. We see here more or less 3 kilometers to the east now, if that is true, but it is not proven yet. I have not seen image proof, nor do the Ukrainians admit the loss yet from what I have seen. There are further attacks east from Donetsk to the west and northwest, all still aimed at Avdiivka. We can also see that here. I think that's it. I'm not completely sure. So the Russians are still attacking here. They still try to go around Avdiivka, basically encircle it, threaten it with encirclement to force the Ukrainians to withdraw, while they themselves can avoid costly house-to-house fighting in the town that is one of the strong points of the Ukrainians right in front of Donetsk city. There again, not really any proof of further gains, also not around Marinka. So mostly the front is steady, more or less. There seem to be small gains in south of Bakhmut, at least it seems like it. And as we can see here, the pro-Russian page also doesn't claim any gains towards Soledar. I've explained in the past why Soledar is so important, as conquering Soledar and then reaching Blahodatne would cut those two lines of communication between Bakhmut and Siversk, which are the strong point, the strongest part of the defensive line east from the Ukrainians, as it runs in a safe distance behind the parallel to the defensive line, allowing for easy redeployment, easy reinforcement, and it gives the Ukrainians the advantage of the inner line, as they themselves can fastly redeploy reinforcements, for instance, from Siversk to Bakhmut. Should the Russians reach Blahodatne, they would have to go around and take a significant longer time. That wouldn't mean the collapse of the front line, but it would definitely weaken it. Now, what's interesting is, despite the Ukrainians still on the offensive here east of the Siversky Donetsk, while they seemingly gain the initiative, restart the offensive east of the Oskil this time, after having inflicted a heavy defeat in Izium and in Kharkiv. And while still being on the offensive in Kherson, that doesn't stop the Russians from attacking west of Donetsk. You would expect them to maybe stop their attacks, as they don't seem anywhere close to a breakthrough, creating reserves by that to reinforce other lines, to stabilize other fronts. But I guess the Russians have a different plan that I personally can't really explain to you. Now, in the comments, occasionally there were obviously some pro-Russian commentators who claim, no, there are no losses and the Ukrainian losses have been severe. So I just stumbled over a few pictures, which I want to show you, which show the situation in Izium. You see here BMP, likely BMP2, it seems, if that's the barrel. BMP2 within Izium captured, probably during maintenance, during repairs. Here we see MTLBs, light armored vehicles here with field modifications. You even see additional armor here. Here also with wooden planks fixed to the armor to improve the armor protection. And there are tons of videos and pictures like that of more and more destroyed and captured equipment. Here we see another BMP2. That I think should be a Tunguska, which obviously was destroyed. We see the burn marks on it. More and more pictures like this damaged here. I'm not sure if that's destroyed or that's regular because of the exhaust flame from the rockets. That's a BM-21 Grad, in case you hear somebody talking about it. So tons of equipment that was captured, that was destroyed. We see more here. That should be a Msta S, so the self-propelled artillery of the Russians. That's BMD 4, I think. That should be the IFVs of the VDV, of the paratroopers. So heavy equipment losses. And while we are here, I can also show you something special. That's what happens when Ukrainians not just liberate a city, but liberate a city where their mother lives. But I'm not going to waste our time, as I might do a compilation of those later for all those, in case you want to share a video with somebody who claims that the Russians are there to liberate the locals. I think a compilation of videos like that might be interesting, but I'm not going to waste our time more to just stick watching to a video like that. Now let's go to the southern front, and there it's becoming interesting too. Representative of the Occupation Administration in Zaporizhzhia, which is this oblast, has Vladimir Rogov said the troop concentration of the Ukrainians in the east, and he should mean Vuhledar, is colossal. That's his word. And Russian military bloggers confirmed that there seems to still be a gathering of Ukrainian forces. Yesterday, I found a thread on Twitter. I from an OSINT guy, but I have never heard of that guy before, and I can't vouch at all for his credibility. Just in that context, it might make some sense to quickly reference him. He claimed that the reinforcements and their own strength allowed the Ukrainians to actually build 3 strike groups, and only 2 of them are in use right now. One would have been in Kharkiv, one is in Kherson, which would mean one is still in reserve and has not been used. He claimed proof of that is that some of the delivered equipment was nowhere seen so far, and I think he is right in some degrees at least. So at least that might turn out that he was actually true there, and that a 3rd strike force is actually still available. I personally voiced my doubts in the past, and I want to voice it again. Personally, I'm doubtful that the Ukrainians are not actually able, that they are actually able to perform 3 simultaneously, 3 big offensives simultaneously. That seems to be such a massive shift in the balance of power that doesn't seem to be justified by the last weeks and months. We might be surprised pretty soon, but an attack here, in my book, mostly only makes sense in case they push forward through Mariupol. That could actually mean a strategic defeat for the Russians, weakening their whole control of the western part of the occupation of occupied Ukraine west of them. It might bring courage in the direction and in the reign of some of their rocket systems in case they get ATAK-MS even more. But the question is, can the Ukrainians actually muster enough forces to break through, not just to run through by 70 kilometers, to break through the Russian front line and then go on a further 70 kilometers, but do they actually manage to get enough not to guard that advance? Because one group pushing through is one thing, but it needs to be protected, so it can't be cut off, that the Russians don't muster some reinforcements here, push together in the middle, and then destroy that unit because it's out of supply and out of support. So basically, it would have to be like an arrowhead pushing forward, and then like an arrowhead widening to the side to gain, to balance that frontal attack into the depth of it. And for that, obviously, a significant force would be needed. And I am still doubtful that they actually still have those reserves while they run 2 additional offensives. I'm pretty sure we will see within the next roughly 2 weeks if there's something to it. But at least in this context, I wanted to say that there are some claims that they might actually still have those offensive forces. I am doubtful, though. A Russian military blogger also saying they are getting ready to advance towards Tokmak from Orkiv. Again, it's just Russian military bloggers claim, but that all of this shows us in some degree how demoralized the Russian internet, the Russian Telegram channels, the Russian military bloggers and observers must be. From the nation that was on the brink of defeat, that was ridiculed, within a week or 2, suddenly they say the Ukrainians are capable of attacking them everywhere. That shows the whole shift of the moral, even far behind the front, on the commentators, on guys like me, and in many cases probably far better connected than me, in some cases surely more competent than me. Those people are now basically saying the Ukrainians might attack us everywhere suddenly. And that should indicate to us how the balance has shifted, at least in the heads. And as Napoleon, for instance, said, what did he say? The moral is 3 times the physical. I think that was a quote from him. So the effect of moral cannot be overstated when it comes to warfare. The fact the side that has the higher moral defends longer and attacks more vigorously, breaks the other side earlier, etc., etc. And the moral seems to be an increasing problem here, that even those guys far behind the front line are suddenly seeing ghosts everywhere. Expect Ukrainian attacks everywhere. Now let's switch to, that's it for now, what I have from the southern front, from Zaporizhzhia and the western part of Donetsk. In Kherson, the Ukrainian attacks are continuing. It's not that this was a diversion. It actually is a serious offensive. The Ukrainian artillery is still pounding Russian logistics and command structure. The interesting part is yesterday, the Ukrainians claimed to have flown 11 combat missions. Now, 11 isn't much. Every number I ever read from the Russians was something between 200 and 250 usually. I think once or twice I read something about 300 combat missions. So just to have a comparison, the Russians basically fly 25 times as much. But the Ukrainian Air Force isn't just still in existence. They actually fly combat missions and attacks on the front line. There's another sign of how well motivated they are, of how their combat will, that they are still performing combat missions, and also show of their skill that they are capable of avoiding the Russian air defense, which was once hailed as one of the most powerful, maybe the best air defense system in the world. They are still able to fly combat missions with even less modern planes than the Russians have. We now have parts disappearing. Prefabricated parts that likely seem to be bridge parts. The reports are they are moving towards Kherson. And this is likely what I reported in the last situation report, that the Russians are trying to rebuild the road bridge at Novakhovka, which has collapsed in the past. So this is a sign of them bringing reinforcements, bringing parts there, likely to construct it. And the latest news is, while I did the German live stream, was that the Russians have bombarded the dam in Kryvyi Rih. This is here. Kryvyi Rih is up here, and seemingly they've bombarded this because this is the Inhulets River. The Inhulets River that goes down here and goes towards the front line is the front line here, and partitions that bridgehead, that Ukrainian bridgehead, over the Inhulets from the other side. And what they very likely aim to do is what I can show you here now. You see a bridge obviously being snapped in half and swimming off on the Inhulets. So the Russians have struck the reservoir to flood the Inhulets, to create a tidal wave running down the river with the aim of destroying Ukrainian bridging equipment. With the aim of destroying bridge, obviously they're going to hit themselves too, because they have pontoon bridges here at Darivka. But on the other hand, the wave should get smaller and smaller the further down the river it goes, so it might hit them far less than the Ukrainians. And that also might lead to the Inhulets flooding some areas. I'm not able in the time of preparation to somehow find a way to confirm where that flooding would happen. That's obviously a massive difference. If the flooding is somewhere up here, it's probably not that big a deal for the Ukrainians. If it should be for some reason exactly here, then they should probably run as fast as they can and go back over the Inhulets while they still can, before they are bogged down here, because obviously once the area is flooded, it'll turn into mud and vehicles will no longer be able to perform any movement. So this is a strategic strike by the Russians in the backyard. Initially thought that it might aim at some electric power plant, but it might be in a direct connection to the Ukrainian activity at the Inhulets. And there it would, as Arestovich, one of the advisors of the Ukrainian president, said, it shows how well our offensive goes that they feel the need to do that. And while we are talking about that, it's time to talk about the other offensive activity by the Ukrainians here in Kherson. The Russian Telegram is reporting a Ukrainian troop concentration at Olhyne, and they expect them to attack Novopetrivka past Arkhangelsk. So the Russians expect a strong Ukrainian attack going this way really soon. I need to drink a little bit. My throat is getting dry. Sorry. When it comes to the Kherson Inhulets bridgehead, we have a map here. This is, again, Raiba. As said, nicely looking. They make them in various different languages, so you can spread it around really well and show the advances of the Russians. Here we see an example. I don't know what that sign is supposed to mean. Either the Russians attacking towards the Ukrainian or the Ukrainians fleeing. I don't know. And here we see all of this supposedly is war zone, so where there's current fighting. But even Raiba would basically confirm that the Ukrainians aren't just here, as we see here, but that they've actually still in this area further south. There are quite a number of reports of Ukrainian attacks towards Davidi Brit, which is really important in case that Bruskynske is not held by the Ukrainians yet. I heard some reports, but I can't confirm it fully yet. As we can see, Davidi Brit is the transport hub along the northern line of communication, along the whole front line. Now, there are some smaller side roads that could be used, but if Davidi Brit falls, reinforcing the whole Russian front line along the Inulets River will be significantly diminished, and obviously that should give the Ukrainians some advantage. When it comes to southern Kherson, they're still fighting around Ternovi Podi. And the interesting part is the Ukrainians say the Russians try to counterattack, which would also show the strength of the Russians here, especially in comparison to Kharkiv, where they had no chance of counterattacking whatsoever. Here, on the other hand, they still have enough forces to at least try counterattacks, and in some places actually having succeeded in that. And the Russians saying the Ukrainians attacking further south. And now Arestovich said Alexandrivka is conquered. That should be this Alexandrivka here. So along the coast, they are also advancing. And now the latest news was also from just 2 or 3 hours ago. Kiselivka is supposedly liberated. That's this town. And if I'm not completely wrong, that's the exact town in the last situation report where I reported that there seems to be sign that the DNR forces there, the so-called Donetsk People's Republics, armed forces which were the garrison in Kiselivka, that they retreated, ran away to the Dnieper. Maybe that was the opening that was needed for the Ukrainian forces to push further. But that's speculation from my part. Also, we still don't have any news about Blahudatne here, whether they have actually bypassed it or whether it's also in Ukrainian hands. But the Ukrainians at least claim they now hold Kiselivka, and here we can see this is now getting close to just 14-15 kilometers away from the outskirts of Kherson itself. I have some news from the Crimea, and here the GRU says something, and the GRU is the Ukrainian military intelligence. I say this every time again, but there are new viewers every single time. So it is important to understand that the GRU, as the Ukrainian military intelligence, is an active war participant. And as such, they have an interest to feed us wrong information that furthers their agenda, either to raise our morale, to make us pressure our politicians to deliver more weapons. They might be interested in demoralizing the Russian side, which might read their reports as well, etc., etc. So it's important to understand this is from the Ukrainian military intelligence and thus has to be taken with a grain of salt. But they say the Russian administration workers sent their family home to Russia. So basically, they make them flee Crimea, and they say FSB workers with the FSB are starting to sell their houses on the Crimea. Both of it would obviously indicate that the Russians on the Crimea expect the Ukrainians to knock on the peninsula fairly soon to get the families to safety, to actually sell their beach houses, to get ready to flee. And thus, obviously, it makes it very interesting for the GRU to spread this, whether it's true or not. We have also two partisan events. One was the rector, the what is it called in the dean, I think it's called in English. I'm not completely sure. So the head of the University of Kherson, which was a turncoat. I'm not completely sure if it's a Ukrainian who turned to the Russians or whether it was a Russian being sent there. He was that's a woman. And there was an IED attack on her. Her Chechen bodyguard was killed, and she is in the hospital with heavy injuries. The partisans claim that she was attacked because she's Russifying the area, spreading propaganda, as well as she's collecting illegal data of her students. And there was another attack reported in Mariupol on a Russian patrol with 3 soldiers wounded. They were trying to remove a sign that is spreading all over Ukraine as a symbol of the resistance, and they were blown up in this regard. But this time, at least, they survived. And we have the sign here. which is the I with 2 dots on top, because this is a letter that is used in the Ukrainian alphabet but not in the Russian. So it allows for an easy symbol to show Ukrainian identity in regards to the Russians, which is easily placed, simple to do with a crayon or with a pen. And it doesn't take much time to leave that symbol behind. And they were trying to remove it and were thus attacked. Now, the latest news, despite the defeats now, the Russians are still not thinking about mobilization. At least that's what Peskov said. We have to say also that a mobilization probably wouldn't change the game anyways. If we see that Russian military bloggers, it was also the former security head, I think, of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, said they shouldn't send more soldiers, they should send more equipment, because the equipment of the soldiers on the front line supposedly is horrid. If you think that Russian military commenters and experts are saying their own soldiers need better equipment, how likely is it that they can actually run a full mobilization with hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 or even 2 million soldiers, equipping them, getting everyone his uniform, getting everyone his gun, getting trucks to transport them, getting the logistics to even feed them in the barracks, train them, getting enough beds for them to sleep, etc. It seems like any Russian mobilization right now would end in an utter disaster and even more humiliation. That doesn't mean a mobilization in itself will be without any effect over time, especially when it started smart. They start with preparations and then slowly pulling in more and more over time. But right now, a mobilization would definitely not be a game changer immediately. But what we do have, while according to themselves, which might be obviously false, and they could claim whatever they want, but as said, the facts say that a mobilization will very likely not be successful. So while we have the information, the claim by the Russians that they are not thinking about mobilization, what we do have is them trying to recruit within prisons. We have a video here which shows this is Pushkin, I think is his name. He's he's so-called Putin's cook, who is running Wagner, the mercenary group, and Prigozhin is his name. And supposedly, unfortunately, I neither speak Ukrainian and Russian. He says nobody who volunteers goes back behind bars. If you serve 6 months on the front line, you are free. If you arrive in Ukraine and decide it's not for you, we execute you. Now, here, the saying is that they recruit everyone, including rapists and murderers, with decades of prison time ahead of them. And there are the first reports of those soldiers arriving, being killed, being wounded. This continues. And then again, recruiting criminals is a time-tested method inside of war, because basically it's a win-win for the nation that is doing it. Either they get rid of their criminals on an easy way, or they have soldiers that fight decently and survive and participate and do their part inside of a war. And the fairness also requires to say that among the first days of the war, I heard the same from the Ukrainians. There was at least news that the Ukrainians offered amnesty to prisoners if the prisoners were willing to fight the Russians. So in this case, we show how the desperation has shifted from one side, seemingly at least, to the other side, which on the other hand doesn't mean the war is decided at all at this point. Still, it just shows the recruitment attempts by the Russians as of now. Russia, and there's sign now from Russia that we already heard the claims over weeks that they made a flag for that they started to hand out passports, etc. But it seems now proven that the Russians actually tried to annex Kharkiv, because the first towns are now discovered to have been disconnected from the Ukrainian electric grid and actually connected to the Russian one. And this would obviously not happen. This effort would not happen unless there's the intent to fully integrate the region within the Russian Federation. Now let's come to the support for Ukraine. There are some news as well. The Ukraine has asked the US now for the ATAK-MS with 300-kilometer range. I think this is a purely political decision not to give them that as of now. But as the Ukrainians have proven, they are good for their word counts. When they give the word not to attack Russia in the Russian Federation, Russian territory, with weapons given to them by the Americans, then they won't do it. And the Americans themselves said that Crimea is Ukrainian territory, so it doesn't count to that. And the other thing is the whole weapon delivery is slowly escalating, which shows that the West is slowly creeping forward in its support towards Ukraine, seeing how far they can go, how Russia will react, and basically doing a salami slicing tactics. So it seems to be likely that at some point they will receive ATACMS, which would then allow them to likely destroy the Kerch Bridge, any potential pontoon bridge laid over the Strait of Kerch, and thus, if this offensive should actually happen towards Mariupol, they could mostly cut off the western part of the occupied Ukraine. The Russians still would have helicopters for transport. They still have their transport planes. They could still go with ships from Novorossiysk to Sevastopol, or with the ferries across the Kerch Strait. But obviously, the volume of support for that part would vastly diminish and improve and improve Ukrainian counteroffensives and make it much more easy that they would success. The other thing is we have is that the US are now seemingly thinking about sending M1 Abrams. The M1 Abrams is very likely the best candidate for that support, because the US is the only country that has modern battle tanks in significant numbers in reserve. You find a tank here and there in reserve, but it's a vast variety, and the Ukrainians would need not only mechanics to be trained. I think General Mark Hertling wrote it fairly early that he thinks they can handle a Ukrainian tankers could be trained on an Abrams within a week. Obviously, it's a difference to explain to them which button does which, or whether to train them to a degree that they actually understand the differences in capabilities of the tank that are by design because of the doctrine. For instance, like the European tanks, the Western tanks mostly are fast driving back as well, because they are aimed at slowing down a Russian offensive, whereas the Russian tanks mostly are slowly driving backwards because they were never meant to do more than parking with their reverse gear. And that allows for different capabilities, for different options within combat, which would diminish the effectiveness unless the Ukrainians are trained on it. And the other thing is, obviously, it's a question of muscle memory. If you're looking through your scope and then have to move your head away to look to the side to see which button to push, you lose valuable time, which might be the question of life and death within battle. But the teaching them the capability of handling that should be done within a week. Training them to be well versed in it would obviously take some months. So that isn't the big issue. The big issue will be the mechanics, which are absolutely not trained for any system close to that, and the logistics train. And there, when we can think about the options, that the Italians might send 10 Ariete tanks, the British might send 20 Challenger 2, and the French send 20 Leclerc, and then maybe we find 60 or 80 Leopard 2. That vast variety, having people trained on each tank, of which only a handful are there, doesn't make much sense. So in this regard, at least, it would kind of make a lot more sense if the Americans would send M1 Abrams to fill up the Ukrainians. This also seems more likely because of the already explained escalation ladder that is slowly being climbed up. And at the same time, the Ukrainians have now proven that not only are they willing to do a serious counteroffensive, but they can actually succeed in it, which will make it much more easy to explain and to defend the decision to send them weapons. And the last point is the Americans still have working tank factories producing M1 Abrams every month. I think it's at least a high two-digit, often a three-digit number per year. So any amount that is sent to the Ukrainians can be filled up fairly soon, while the Americans are sitting on a stockpile of several thousand M1 Abrams on reserve. So while if they were to send 500, they would still have vast reserves, whereas the rest of the other potential tanks, that is not that much the case. And the last thing is now, as I'm German and the Americans are always asking, what is Germany doing? We have some news, at least from Germany. Now Germany has confirmed to actually send 4 Iris-T air defense systems to Ukraine. 2 of them will already arrive this year. Now, this is probably more for strategic defense, so it's not perfectly suited to follow advancing troops, but at least it will help the Ukrainians defend some of their cities. That was it for now, and I'll take a quick zip to ease my throat, and we can switch to the question and answers. Is Armenia, Georgia going to spread to Russian Federation and lead to a collapse? I'm not completely sure what you mean with, is it going to spread? Georgia is currently seemingly preparing a referendum whether they should declare war on Russia and try to reconquer Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Let me quickly get the map so I can show that. But I'm somehow doubtful whether that's a wise choice, because while the Georgians, why they might be able to conquer it now, as not only have the Russians withdrawn their troops inside of the two separatist regions inside of Georgia, those regions have actually sent part of their military to aid the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So while they might be able to overpower it, and while it's fairly easy to defend in many parts, you have tunnels, you have small passes that can easily be defended. In total, it's 4 million against a nation of 140 million. So unless the Russians declare peace and keep it, that's highly likely that it's not going to end well for the Georgians, especially as Georgia doesn't have any ally to speak of who is actually willing to send military aid in case of a later Russian attack. That's one thing. Armenia and Azerbaijan will be far more interesting, as we'll find out fairly soon if the CSTO is actually being called upon and if they are actually going to agree. As I said in that short video I did today, that in case Russia is joining, they are more or less bluffing. I'm highly doubtful, because Azerbaijan is not doing this without Turkish support. And if the Turks support Azerbaijan, I can't imagine the Russian forces being strong enough to defeat the combined Azerbaijani and Turkish forces, especially as Turkish has the advantage of the fight taking place basically at its front door. All their logistics is directly connected to Armenia, whereas we can see the Russians can't even get supplies in. The Georgians hate Russians, and they will never allow supplies going through, so they can fly over it, but there's still the Georgian air defense. And if they don't go through that, they basically have to fly through the Caspian Sea, maybe hope that Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan allow flyover, then go through Iran and try coming in from the south. Whereas the Turks have direct land connections and can go directly in. So if Russia plays there, bluffs, if Russia agrees to help, it seems to me that it's more going to be a bluff. And if they are not joining the war, if they are not helping Armenia, and it's not solved by any other means really soon, then they should lose their position as a power broker in the Caucasus and in Central Asia, as there has even been, let me see, I even found it here. Today, seemingly, we have that Xi Jinping said that basically he said he says he respects Kazakhstan's independence, and there were already rumors that Kazakhstan might leave the CSTO and join, and then likely would join up with a military alliance with China. This rumor was not confirmed today. The Kazakhs said it's false. But this would open up new windows of opportunity. And if the Russians have proven that not only are they incapable of deciding a conflict right in their backyard, but also they are leaving their allies alone, that would make the CSTO fall apart, and thus make the Russians lose Central Asia as well as the Caucasus, and Belarus would be in big trouble as well. How would Russia hold up if the United States got involved directly in the war? The initial thought was that if that war spreads, it might become problematic, because once NATO has defeated the Russians might touch nukes. But as of now, there can be no serious doubt that the Russians would be wiped away. NATO in itself, probably, if the Europeans had the structures, which they don't have. Unfortunately, all of Europe is more or less incapable of fighting a bigger war without American help. We've seen that in Libya when France and Great Britain were forcing the United States to get involved to even be able to do that military campaign here. But even European military strength now should be able to wipe the floor with the Russians regarding their performance in this war and regarding their losses. The United States alone could probably reach, that would be extremely one-sided, to put it this way. And even more so than it would have been thought before the war, where at least the Russians were still respected. Everyone serious would have said the Russians have a weaker military than the United States. Now it's the joke is that the Russians have the second best military of the world inside of Ukraine. Since Russia is unable to fill its CSTO obligations, do you think Georgia may try to take back its territory? I think I already answered that. I can guarantee you that they are tempted. I think they might be capable of doing it. What I doubt, though, is that it's a wise decision, because unless Russia disintegrates afterwards and falls apart into single states, they would guarantee the wrath. And think about Russia actually losing that war. Whoever is in charge of Russia then, whether it's Putin or somebody successor of his, Georgia would feel like a victory that is actually possible, even with the weakened Russian forces by then. That would increase the standing, the reputation of the then current leader of Russia. So I would expect the Russians to come back even after a defeat of Ukraine, to go into Georgia and this time probably take everything, unless they fall apart. So for a Georgian side, I think they might be militarily capable of taking it, but I would say it would be a very unwise choice. If your map can also show contours, that might be helpful to show natural approach routes as well as no-go areas. That map can actually do that. The problem is that it's a little less convenient here. We have topographic maps, and if we zoom in, you can see some topographic parts. Where is the current center of gravity in this conflict? I think as of we have two important parts in this country, and I'm in this conflict, and I'm not completely sure center of gravity means actually what I understand it to mean in the German sense. Let me just Google it before I say some nonsense. And I don't see an issue in admitting that in my second language, in a later acquired language, I might not completely understand what it means. Source of power that provides moral and physical strength, freedom of action, or will to act. So we're single center of okay. The center of gravity on the Ukrainian side is clearly their moral. The president among them, already having been in Izium, which was just liberated, and as we can see, the will to fight of the Ukrainian people is deciding that war. The weapons are an important tool for that, a tool that cannot be underestimated. But it's the Ukrainians who didn't give up. It's the Ukrainians who are fighting tooth and nail, who blew themselves up in a case north of Kiev where a pioneer blew himself up. So if I think that is what the question you were answering. As said, center of gravity was not in my repertoire before this stream, unfortunately. I believe Wagner mercenaries have an obligation to attack as their contract as mercenaries to attack. Of that I haven't heard, but I know that some of the volunteers are being told for every 500 meters they advance, they get a certain bonus, which already shows that we are reaching levels when it comes to the Russian offensive that is closing in on World War I trench warfare relations, where it's a big victory if you have advanced 8 kilometers. So that shows how well the Russian offensive was going. How long before the reported 40 functional tanks captured recently can be used against the Russians? This is nothing I could seriously answer to you, because some of them might basically be fueled up where the crew just got shot and fell over. They might be fueled up with the key in the ignition, and the others might be destroyed by the Russian soldiers, as I explained in that video there, where I learned how to disable my equipment. The Russians surely have learned the same. If a soldier just went in with his buttstock from the rifle and destroyed every display, it might take a week if they have the spare parts. They might have to scrap some of the tanks and just use them for spare parts. So seriously, to give an educated answer is, in my book, impossible, as nobody knows how they are on the inside. And then the next question is, even if we knew the exact shape of each tank, we don't know how the repair capabilities of the Ukrainians are and how much they're overused. We know that the Ukrainians sent helicopters to Poland. The Czech Republic said they are repairing equipment for the Ukrainians, tanks among that. We shouldn't forget that Czechoslovakia and Poland were producing the T-72 on license. So in theory, they at least once had the capabilities of producing and repairing stuff like this. Those tanks captured here might be on trailers right now on their way to Prague, to Skoda or whoever did that repair, to be refurbished there and being repaired there. So in this regard, there's no way of honestly saying that with any confidence. That isn't nonsense. Have you seen any evidence of the LPR starting to withdraw their forces, or at least not support the Russians? I've shown a video of, was it DNR or LPR? Can't remember. One of the two of their extremely low morale. And I know that I also showed it in one of the situation reports on the English channel. That video appeared while I was already doing the English channel. That showed like the soldiers basically saying, shoot us, send the prosecutors, we are not going to fight, we are not going to follow orders. And it was a ton of them attacking their officer, that the officers are just looting and not supporting them, etc. So, but this was a general sign of morale. This is not a sign that they retreated somewhere. As I said in I think the short videos and in the past videos, the rumors of Kremina and Svatove already being evacuated seems to have proven to be complete nonsense, like I judged at that point. So it seems there doesn't seem to be any proof as of now of the LNR running actually from that front line in particular now. So to answer your question, have you seen any evidence of the LPR starting to withdraw their forces, or at least not support the Russians? No. Rumors I've heard a lot, including that Pushilin, the head of the DNR, supposedly has already fled to Russia, like he's expecting the front line to collapse within the next 24 hours. But for me, that's part of the current victory disease the Ukrainians are facing, that everything is basically showing them that that Russia is about to collapse, and in 2 weeks they're going to be at the outskirts of Moscow. So I don't give too much about that. I don't put too much trust in those rumors. What do you make of Russian engineering capability? Are they able to properly consolidate? Engineering. Consolidate, I would have guessed you mean the front line. The Russians have, when it comes to supplies, it's known that they have their railroad troops. So they have, I think, 30 or 35,000 soldiers actually, with the specific task of building, maintaining, and guarding railroads. So you would expect that that they should be able to keep the logistics going, if that was the question. But there it might actually be a problem of my understanding of the question. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. Do we expect Russia to send troops to Armenia? If they don't, do you think CSTO could collapse? I saw the videos earlier, but I wonder if there are any updates. I have some updates, but I wasn't able to organize them, unfortunately, because of the long German stream. And then I had to have dinner and had to prepare this stream. So if you've seen them, as of now, I don't have any new information. I don't have, I doubt that Russia can send troops if Turkey opposes. And I would expect Azerbaijan not to do that if they wouldn't have if they didn't have the support of the Turks. So I would expect CSTO to collapse unless Erdogan, for whatever reason I can't judge, has decided that this is too much and is telling Aliyev, I think is his name, to withdraw. So I think it's a real possibility that CSTO is going to collapse. When is the USA Lend-Lease shipments going to arrive? As far as I know, all the equipment deliveries lately are part of the Lend-Lease contract. I think it's the legal justification to send weapons. Every HIMARS that is recently arriving, the HARM missiles, the ammunition, all of it should already be part of the Lend-Lease. Is shooting at a dam not a violation of the rules of law? It depends on the military purpose. I think a general rule of thumb, and I'm far from an expert there, I just need to emphasize this, but a general rule of thumb would be more or less if the military value of an attack justifies the civilian losses, the civilian damage. This is more or less. So even attacking a nuclear power plant can actually be justified. And I read into that a little during the accusations of the attacks there. If that nuclear power plant is essential to the other side's war effort, then there can even be a justification to attack a nuclear power plant. So bombing a dam just to kill civilians is purely not justified. Bombing a dam to destroy an electric power plant might be justified if this is the power plant that runs the biggest arms factory of the nation. But blowing up a dam, if it floods advances, if it kills enemy soldiers, is highly likely that it might be justified, especially if the civilian losses are more or less irrelevant or not of any reasonable size. Whether there are civilian losses at all here along the inholets, I can't say. So I think it might actually be justified in that case, but it depends on a lot of factors. And again, I can just emphasize my knowledge of the international rules of law are limited. I'm no lawyer, and I'm not an expert about the rules of law the rules of war when it comes to the actual legal framework. Can M1A2 Abrams repair depots be set up in the bordering NATO countries? Could that help with the logistics and the repair issues? Of course it can. The problem of it is that they need to be able to maintain them. When you think about the howitzers they have been sent, let it be M109, Krab from the Poles, and the German and Dutch Panzerhaubitze 2000. Just imagine a minor problem. Second gear doesn't get in. That means they can only use first gear and third gear. Now, everyone who's driving a car and a truck knows that it's probably possible, unless it's steeply uphill, to switch into third gear from the first. So that thing is still driving. It's not driving perfectly, but it's still working. Now, in a tank is facing the enemy directly. He's being shot at. If something isn't working perfectly there, that tank might have a slower reaction time. That tank might not get it back into cover. That tank might not be able to attack and destroy the enemy before he gets attacked. And then not only is the tank lost, the crew is also lost. So that surely can be done for bigger damages, where the Ukrainians advance, have some damages, some losses, leave the tanks behind, advance further, and once the tanks are in their own backyard, in their hinterland, they pick up the tanks and drive them to Poland. That's absolutely possible, especially as the Poles should be about to learn how to handle them as they are receiving their Abrams. The question is, but that is not enough, because every minor thing that just needs regular maintenance in the high pressure of that use. For instance, a tank, you jump over trenches. Now the torsion bar suspension can break in that if it's fast enough, if the jump is big enough. That's not that big of a deal. You can replace that. But first of all, you need new torsion bars. Then you need the tools to switch it. And then you need somebody who knows how to do that. And for that to ship them back to Poland every single time would probably not make sense. So the Poles in Poland, there can be repair yards to support that, but at least the regular maintenance would have to be done, and smaller repairs would have to be done somewhere within Ukraine. The Ukrainians now, as the informations are pulling a lot of their tanks back further into the country for bigger repairs. That is well known. So both sides actually don't repair here or whatever. Let's say The Russians don't repair their tanks here. If they have a choice, they usually bring them into Russia. And the Ukrainians, from what I read, like if a tank is damaged here, they bring it to maybe to Kiev. Far back, so not only the tank is safe from attack, but also much more important, the guys working on the tank are safe. This in some way will be applied here as well, but smaller maintenance, you can't bring the tank back if a lid is not closing properly. So you to increase efficiency, they at least need to have some degree of skill handling the tank to use it efficiently. How long will it be before the People's Republic of China begins to start taking slices of the bear? Doesn't the PRC have disputed land with Russia? So officially, I think it's not disputed. And unfortunately, I always forget the name of those two. I can Google it for you in a very moment, but there were two treaties. One treaty basically handing over this, and that's the interesting part. The two treaties, I think 1850 more or less both, are the only two treaties of the uneven, is it called uneven in English? In German, it's uneven. The treaties that were not equal. Unequal, I think it's actually. Unequal treaties. Those two treaties with Russia are, as far as I know, the only unequal treaties that are not reversed at this point. Hong Kong is back. The trade agreements are back. Tsingtao, Port Arthur, all of those are back in Chinese hands, except that area that was handed over to the Russians 170 years ago. So in theory, they could find historic claims and the historic justification to that. I think, though, that this is not going to be too likely as long as they still see the Russians of some use, obviously, because that would be kind of an act of war. And you don't do that to somebody who might not be your ally. I think the so-called China-Russia alliance is completely overstated. If you look at Chinese history and the actual power imbalance between the two, I don't see a real alliance there. But China and Russia have common interests, and quite a lot of them. And if you take somebody's territory, even your common interests might no longer work to help him work with you. So I don't think we are going to see the any Chinese advances into Russian territory anytime soon. How do you think the war in Ukraine ends? Will Russia survive in its current state if they are fully defeated? Well, that's a good question, and that's a question that's increasingly being discussed. I'm pretty sure, as I'm talking to an English-speaking audience, a lot of you might have read or listened to Seyhan and Friedman, and I think both of them say that Russia is going to disintegrate. This is obviously one of the big fears that is in the West, not just because we love Russia so much, but because Russia has the biggest arsenal of nuclear weapons, and if Russia disintegrates, who is going to have those weapons? But the internal divisions are definitely widening. We are already hearing about minority group rights activists, minority group rights organizations popping up, getting more prominent, because the majority of the losses of the Russian forces are among non-ethnic Russians. In Buryatien and Tuva, for instance, the losses are significantly higher, whereas from Moscow and St. Petersburg, hardly anyone is dying. And if that war continues and if the defeat continues, at some point those people will no longer be happy as playing the cannon fodder of the ethnic majority. So that will help in pulling Russia apart. The other thing is what we hear from Chechnya, that Kadyrov is setting up additional police forces supposedly to help the war effort, but his troops mostly are not on the front line, so he's preserving his strength. And recently he has asked for air defense systems being stationed in Chechnya now to defend against Ukrainian attacks. Why and from where would Ukrainians attack Chechnya, and with what? So the guessing is that he might be asking for air defense system in case there is another breakaway of the Chechen Republic. So he would have air defense system to defend his new realm. So I don't think we are anywhere close to a breakup of Russia, but the forces pulling it apart are definitely getting stronger. I hope this is more or less an answer you were expecting. I don't think I am competent enough to lean myself further out the window, as we say in German. But the is it called centrifugal forces are visible and are definitely getting stronger. How is the war going to end? I think the military side. I say that on the German channel relatively early, basically from the beginning. Obviously, the decision to end the war has to be diplomatic. It is always diplomatic, but the conditions for that will be set militarily. This war will not end anytime soon by both sides sitting together, because effectively one side would have to admit defeat without being defeated on the battlefield. So it's not going to happen. If Russia gives up the majority of its... Russia will not get out of this war. Or to put it other ways, there's a saying, for war it just needs one, and for peace it needs two. And obviously that's true. So for Ukraine and Russia to make peace, both sides need to be happy with the result. And that result right now means Ukraine wants everything back, including Crimea. And Russia means they still claim they want to denazify, which means they want a regime change. They want to demilitarize. Ukraine's army should now be significantly stronger than at the beginning of the war, especially as they gotten better and have significant combat experience now. They want Ukraine not to join NATO. That wasn't really the issue at the beginning, because of Article 10 of NATO. Article 10 requires the joining nation to improve the security of NATO. And nobody can explain to me how it would improve the security of NATO if Ukraine joins while it's having territorial claims towards a nuclear power in case of Crimea, or while it has separatist regions supported by said power. So that hasn't changed anything. But his claims of annexing and keeping the provinces up aren't something that he's likely going to give up. So we will have to see a military decision on the battlefield, which means the war will likely draw into 23. It will continue for quite some more time, and peace would then mean that one side is exhausted and likely is facing internal divisions, because I would not expect the war to end with the Ukrainians having full control over their international border. At least not by fighting. Maybe the Russians are withdrawing at some point. And I wouldn't expect the Russians to win by reaching the Polish border. So either way, I would expect a defeat being admitted before that is reached. But I don't see it anywhere close. And at that point, it might be good to emphasize that I would not consider this war won yet for Ukraine. They seem to have the strategic initiative right now. They should gain more ground, but Russia can still come back, and Russia can still inflict serious losses and can still inflict defeats. This was that. Is there any news on how this war is affecting China's decision to potentially invade of Thailand? You probably mean Taiwan. The general expectation was at the beginning of the war, and on my German channel, I always have to reference to it because I think we're at 150 videos there now. The second video, I think, was that one of the big potentials is after Russia's defeat of Ukraine. I was one of those many who expected Ukraine it being a question of days more or weeks rather than months. So after the defeat of Ukraine, I would expect a potential Taiwan invasion. Now, the reaction to it has been vastly different. The West, instead of falling apart, instead of NATO falling apart, NATO now is getting 2 new members. The West is reinvigorated. Several armies are increasing in size, Western armies. Japan is increasing its military budget significantly. The alliance is strengthened, the relations among the alliance are strengthened, and the Western powers have shown that they, at least until now, that might change over the winter, that they are willing to impose devastating sanctions, even if it hurts themselves. And China should be afraid of that, as it is dependent on energy and food imports. It's trying hard to fight that dependency. But as of now, it's far from having achieved any autarky in this regards. So even a blockade of China would already bring it to its knees. I think Saihan said it at some point, like half a year later, the engines stand still, and after a year, hundreds of millions are starting to die. Now, that might be a little colorful and a little exaggerated, especially as China is actively preparing stockpiles to fight this threat. But if the West reacts as strongly to an invasion of Taiwan, then it might conquer Taiwan, but it hasn't won the war. It actually loses it. And the next question is, will it even be able to conquer Taiwan? Biden has twice now said he's supporting that the US will support Taiwan. Some see it as a change in doctrine. I don't want to offend anyone, but I think Biden sometimes says something that he doesn't really mean because he's a little tired. I hope I said that friendly and unoffensive enough in an unoffensive way. So I'm not completely sure it actually means a full change of doctrine. But that the West and the US are now aware how important Taiwan is, even more than before. I think I just read that the law is passing ahead that will for the first time since Chiang Kai-shek give Taiwan active military aid, so paid by the US taxpayer. And if it's that act that I read before, then it would even allow for the implementation of stockpiling on Taiwan, which would be under US control. So the US could decide to hand over armaments to the Taiwanese in the time of need. The US are having such stockpiles in Israel as well. Or it would allow the US to just fly in soldiers as their equipment is already on the island. So that would strengthen Taiwan's ability. And then it comes if the US is actually intervening. And Japan has twice said from not fully official points. I think both times it was something like the deputy defense minister. I think once the deputy defense minister, and I think once the deputy foreign minister or something. So deliberately, it seems to be the second line. But they said Taiwan is basically a matter of national interest for the US. So for Japan. So it seems increasingly likely that Japan would get involved too. And then we have to see, while the Chinese are preparing for that invasion for several decades, they don't build any civilian ferries anymore for 20, 25 years that aren't prepared for usage in a naval invasion. This preparation will still take weeks and months and will be visible. And to cross the Formosa Strait towards Taiwan, which is in US measurements, I think 100 miles, more or less, so 180 kilometers, depending on where they start. It takes hours, at least 6 hours, maybe 10 hours to pass, which gives plenty of time to attack those ships to start with countermeasures. So I think a Taiwanese invasion is not coming anytime soon anymore, at least not within, let's say, the next 12 months. I think the danger now is significantly lower than it was on March the 1st this year. I've heard that the Georgian government is Russia friendly, though. Is that true? I've heard a theory that the proposed... Oh, come here, süßer Kerl. Unfortunately, I have a little terrorist here, a four-legged one, who sometimes wants my attention and tries to sabotage live streams and video. That's Siegfried, the Dragon Slayer, by the way. So that the Georgians are Russia friendly, that the proposed referendum is a war, is show and that they don't want war. I would expect and hope that the Georgian government is smart enough not to want war if it's actually a distinct possibility. And in this regard. But what is about the rest, I simply can't comment. I have no idea, no serious idea about Georgian politics at this very moment. I can't even say which party is ruling and whether it's right or left. So commenting on this is vastly outside of my expertise, and thus I have to say I have no effing clue. I learned that you can't say this F word, even though I don't really understand it. And if I am allowed to reference to popular media, I would quote Ron Swanson. There's only one bad word, and that's taxes. If a word is good enough for a sailor, it's good enough for you. But I guess I have to respect that peculiarity of my American viewers, not to use the F word too much. So I have no clue about that, and I think I always try to interpret this as a good part of this channel, that I don't even try to claim that I have a clue about everything, and thus I'm always happy about the point where I actually can say I don't even know what this is about, and thus I can't answer it. The next question: would a joint Moldova-Ukrainian force be thinking about clearing the Russians out of Transnistria sooner or later? It's obviously tempting. The problem is the Moldovans themselves are not capable of it. Their army is too weak. It should be weaker than the Transnistrian army. And Transnistria is, yeah, I have a cat cam, but it's not installed. So I need to check. I could probably put it up real quick. Because it's always the Germans paid for it. The Germans paid for it, the German channel. But it's not working for whatever reason. I don't know why. That's supposed to be it, I think. Yeah, can't do it now. I'll try to do it the next time because it's like a meme on the German channel, and I'm going to introduce it here too. So would Moldova and so on. Okay, so Transnistria is legally part of Moldova. For the Ukrainians to go in there, they would basically have to either invade sovereign Moldovan territory, or they would basically have to go into an alliance. Now, Moldova, as far as I know, has it in its constitution that they are a neutral country. And it's not really neutral if you make an alliance with a neighbor to do a military operation. So in this regard, I actually think that Transnistria will likely survive this, even if it ends with a complete Russian defeat. Because while the Ukrainians could overrun it, at least once they are done with the Russians, with their experienced, well-equipped and huge army, and help the Moldovans get rid of that problem, I think also that the Moldovans have actually pledged themselves to solve that issue diplomatically and without force. So if I'm not completely wrong there, then I would expect Transnistria to actually survive this war, even with the Russian soldiers in there. Do you think Putin will order a tactical nuke attack? And what do you think the response of the West and Asia will be? From the Russia experts I listen to, and I can't emphasize enough that I am not a Russia expert. So when it comes to things like this, I can judge, I allow myself to judge a military perspective and maybe a response to it, but the decision making, I have no clue. So I can't tell you if that's actually a real possibility. But the Russia experts I've listened to said it over the last month, that tactical nuke is basically out of the question. Because when it comes to the interior workings of Russia, it cannot be justified. We should not forget that this whole war is being sold to the Russian people, that the Ukrainians are basically Russians, and that a small clique of Nazis in the government, who are puppets of NATO, try to build a so-called anti-Russia. So basically, they are Russians, but are victims. It's just 1 million or 2 that we have to kill, and then they're all Russians and everything will be fine. That's even something they said on their national television in Russia 1. So to justify it in this case, to use tactical nukes against a nation that is suppressed by a small clique, would be hard to justify. Now that's what I heard. I can't say much more, whether I judge it or not. I hope, I want to believe that judgment, because I obviously don't want to see a tactical nuke. Now, what would be the response? I don't actually think too much, because whoever has a problem with Russia breaking all the rules already has voiced that. The West will not strike back with nuclear weapons, because nobody wants to exchange Berlin, London, Paris, Rome, Washington, San Francisco, New York, and other cities for a tactical nuke that was blowing up a few thousand Ukrainian soldiers, or even a small nuke that blew up a Ukrainian city. Nobody wants to exchange that for their own countries. Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear umbrella. Nobody ever said we're going to defend Ukraine with nukes, at least not to my knowledge. So I don't think there would actually be much response. Now, what could be a smart response? That's obviously now we're entering politics, and I have been a politician in the past. So if I still was a politician in a country with actual nukes, I would make sure that my government tells the Russians in back channels, should you ever use tactical nukes, then you've broken so many rules that we would break the non-proliferation treaty and would give the Ukrainian tactical nukes as well so they can respond in kind. I think that might work, but it would obviously only work if it is actually if it's actually believed, and I forgot the word. So deterrence was the word. Deterrence only works if it is believed. If you threaten somebody and he believes you're not going through with it, you hurt yourself more than if you hadn't threatened it at all. So such a threat, trying to deter Russia from using nukes, would only work if the nation was actually willing to actively hand over tactical nukes to Ukraine. And how likely that is, I think we can all agree that it's extremely unlikely. But if we would expect a tactical nukes by the Russians, telling them only after you use them, but then we will give the Ukrainians some, that might be an effective deterrence when we are entering politics now. But I don't think there would be too much reactions, because what would happen? Do you think Angola or Panama, where I'm living right now, which doesn't have any sanctions, Panama will suddenly sanction Russia? I somehow don't really believe it. So I don't think it's changing. It's going to mean too much. Is it possible for Ukraine to take Kherson within the next 2 weeks? Everything's possible. Is it likely? I would say no. I would expect... I made a bet, not really with somebody, but I was asked like a week ago how likely I would see it that Kherson is taken within the next 3 months, and I said less than 30%. I think the Russian defensive lines are strong. I heard over months that they were reinforcing their defensive lines, at least 3 different defensive lines behind each other. They even brought in prefabricated bunkers. We saw pictures of that being transported to the front line. So, of course, a breakthrough is possible. The front might collapse because of low morale or something like this. But in general, I would expect the Russians to continue fighting and the advance to be fairly slow. And Kherson has such a tremendous importance for the Russians that they can't just give it up. It's, in my book, this is basically admitting strategic defeat, because the whole war means that uniting Russia with the Russian-speaking parts at the very least and getting a chokehold on Ukraine. And for that, reaching Odessa is one of the essential points. In Odessa too, there were uprisings in 2014 of pro-Russian activists. The Russians believed Odessa will welcome them as liberators, and Odessa can only ever... Now, this fantasy is over, but they will only ever be able to reach Odessa if they stay on the right side of the Dnieper, so here the northern side, because the chance of them crossing that wide river when the other side is a prepared, well-armed defender with their current forces is close to nil. After a general mobilization, willing to lose thousands of soldiers in a crossing, it might at some point be an option again. But unless they inflict a serious, massive defeat on the Ukrainian forces, I don't see them ever crossing the Dnieper again in this war if they once lose that side. So if they want to admit defeat, give up Mykolaiv and Odessa, then they can give up Kherson, but until then they should fight for it tooth and nail, because it's of such a tremendous importance, and any amphibious invasion is now reaching the realm of fantasy after the loss of the Moskva, of several smaller ships, and of at least one landing boat, while the Ukrainians have received a lot of anti-ship missiles. So Kherson is of such importance for the strategic goals of the Russians, also connecting them with Transnistria, that I don't think they can afford giving it up anytime soon. This, in comparison, Kharkiv doesn't really matter that much. They can reconquer that. They once they gain strength, they can even come back from Belgorod if they really want to. But Kherson, they can't come back, at least not within any reasonable effort. So they can't give it up. And that's why I expect them to fight much harder there than anywhere else, and why I would not expect them to lose it within 2 weeks. I might be surprised here, I might be wrong, but that's at least I was able to explain to you my reasoning why I would judge this not to be that easy. Which city do you think has suffered the worst, largest war crimes, Mariupol? I cannot really. I have no idea. Mariupol seems likely, as the killing of civilians there, large scale, by destroying house blocks by blocks, is probably in many cases not justified. As said, there is some leeway in there. For instance, if soldiers actively defend from a house with civilian inside, the other side should be legally allowed to attack that house. Nobody can force somebody to endure being shot at just because there are some civilians. It's the duty of the defender to try to get civilians out of the way. Depending on where you judge those war crimes in these circumstances, I think Mariupol might be an option, but again, not really my competence here. I don't know what the reference to Operator Starsky means that is being said here. Was that the question from Operator Starsky? That would be interesting, actually, because I think I've subscribed to his channel. So far, we don't have info regarding the civilian losses. Luckily, no people were harmed, but the level of water in inulets raised almost 3 feet. Okay, so that's information from the from what's happening here. No info regarding civilian losses. That's good. Level rose by 3 feet. That's 1 meter. That might obviously endanger some bridging. No idea if that will cause serious problems to the Ukrainians. I guess we should know within the next 24 hours. Is it a sign of Russian manufacturing difficulties that they are trying to buy from North Korea and Iran? Those countries don't usually seem like net exporters except for oil. Actually, Iran is exporting weapons whenever it can. Hardly anyone dares to buy from them, but they do export because they have a serious weapons industry, even though it is limited to some degree in its capabilities. But when it comes to that, it shows that the basic capabilities of a military complex, which is producing ammunition. Like, if you look around in the world, like every second, third world country can produce its own shells. Building a dumb grenade isn't that insanely difficult. It's not a piece of cake, of course, but it's also not rocket science. That they actually run dry there seems to show that at least they failed highly in preparation of the war, and that their industry can't by no means keep up. Whether that's due to sanctions or something, I am a little more doubtful, because the ingredients of a grenade should be more or less available within Russia. I don't think they need to import too much. The question is how much the manufacturing equipment plays a role there. What I read, most of their factories now run with German manufacturing tools. And for those, they obviously don't get spare parts anymore. They can't replace them from within Germany, and they don't get maintenance anymore. So those parts, the capabilities should diminish over time. In general, it's a sign of Russian weakness, of Russian unpreparedness of that war. And when it comes to in both ways, neither of the countries is known to high-tech export, and Iran especially is not known as a exporter of military equipment. And if we think about the Russian aircraft industry, that they actually have to come to Iran to buy drones, that's embarrassing and will not go down well with the Russian, with the nations purchasing weapons from Russia. And when we come to preparedness of guns, I can just I need to reference Germany as well. As far as I know, Germany right now has the ammunition for 2 days of war. So they are not the only ones who lack any preparation. As Poland is going to receive M1A2 tanks, Will they send the old Russian tanks they have to Ukraine? That's the plan, and I think a significant part of those are already in Ukraine. I can't say that all of them already are, but the T-72 M1s, I think, should more or less all be there. And the M1A2s were supposed to replace the PT-91 Tfadi. So I would expect them to either already having arrived or arriving soon. And that's a couple of hundred tanks in total. What is your opinion of Germany's decision not to send mothballed or Leopard tanks to Ukraine? A shame. It's a shame. That's the government, coalition government. It's run by the Social Democratic Party, who is giving lip service to supporting Ukraine. And I'm not getting the word. Condemn was what I was looking for. To condemn Russia. But when it comes to actual help, they are somewhat hesitant. It's not as bad as it's internationally spread around. At some point, it would justify a separate video about that. But not to send mothballed tanks is inexcusable. If the Ukrainians want them, if the industry is willing, then they should send them. The same with the Marder IFV. Rheinmetall has repaired 16 of them. They are ready to be sent, and the government simply refuses. For political reasons, because they claim that they want to coordinate with their allies, and thus don't want to step out. I think a big part of it will also be to historic complex, to the past. This party cannot accept the fact that German tanks might shoot at Russian tanks after after the crimes the Nazi empire has committed within Russia and the Soviet Union. With regard to PRC, ROC, look, People's Republic of China and Republic of China, that's Taiwan. Look at the exposure the PRC has in Three Gorges Dam. The ROC has some surface-to-surface capability. If Three Gorges is breached, very bad. True, they have cruise missiles that are supposedly capable of reaching Beijing. That's this distance. I have no idea where the Three Gorges is. It should be somewhere in this region. So if they have missiles reaching Beijing, they should be able to reach Three Gorges. And there was a dam breaking in China during the Great Leap Forward, and I think it did cost them 120,000 civilians or something like this. Yeah. What does the dam being destroyed by Russia in Kryvyi Rih do to the Ukrainian offensive? I already mentioned this. I already mentioned this. We heard that apparently the water is rising by 3 feet. So basically a 1 meter high tidal wave is going down the inlets, which is passing here, is part of the front line here, and here is bridged by the Ukrainians on their bridgehead across the inlets. And once a 1 meter wave goes down, it could obviously damage and sweep away bridging equipment and flood areas too, making them impassable. So it might help the Russians, but to judge it, it depends on how fast the Ukrainians react. It depends on where the flooding happens. I already said it in the situation report. You might not have been here. Like if the flooding happens here, it's a whole different story than when it's happening here. Will there be a dampening effect of the tidal wave by the undulations in the Inolets River? Or is the amount of extra water all that matters? The problem is I don't even know what undulations means. Let me use my translation tool. By the waves. By the wave, I have no idea. That's not my expertise. I'm sorry. I have no idea. I could just do guesswork, but I guess my guesswork wouldn't be more qualified than anybody else's guesswork, so I'll rather keep my mouth shut. I'm sorry. Is there any data on the matter of Ukrainians being trained outside of Ukraine since 2014? Would probably explain the ability to apply Western weapons and tactics. I'm pretty sure there is, I just don't have it. I just read that I think the British just recently trained another 5,000 within Britain. The Danish want to train them within Denmark, but the total amount is in the tenth of thousands. And I read that I think in 2017, more or less, They reached a point where they were able of starting to teach their own. So from that point onwards, it should have multiplied when it comes to infantry and general soldiering. When it comes to Western weapons, I don't really know whether there was any pre-training before the war. It wouldn't make sense to have that. Tactics, on the other hand, was trained intensively by mostly Canadians and Americans, as far as I know, even though other nations participated. And as I said, as far as I know, after 2 or 3 years, they supposedly reached a point where they were proficient enough in that to teach their own, and thus multiplying the effect. If the Russians give up Kherson, then they may as well leave Crimea and the rest of the country, as it's open corridor to Crimea. The thing is, the Ukrainians still have to cross the Dnieper too, and what counts for the Ukrainians counts for the Russians counts for the Ukrainians as well. I would highly doubt the Ukrainians being capable of crossing the Dnieper. It's too wide and too difficult. Sure, they can go over here with motorboats, but they come without any heavy support. So they can do raids, seriously. But a real serious amphibic invasion over a river of that size, I don't want to be part of that invasion, to be perfectly honest. So is it theoretically possible? Yes. But are they willing to take the losses to force it through? Because if you start it, you can't stop. You need to go through with it, no matter the losses. And I have high doubts that the Ukrainians are willing to throw away the lives of their soldiers. So I would expect the Ukrainians not to fall. Let's see. Okay, I'm actually back. Interesting. Welcome people to Panama. Internet breaking down for a minute or two. I'm sorry. Happens. Usually doesn't happen, but that's one of the disadvantages of living here. I ordered, what is it called? That Elon Musk's internet. So maybe that once that's here, that's a little more stable. Usually it doesn't happen, but unfortunately sometimes it happens. And I saw that 2/3 of the viewers obviously disappeared, but whatever. Happens too. So the question was, I don't know where it broke off. Do you think that Kherson could be retaken if Ukraine didn't talk about it and didn't attack Oblast and the bridges? So destroying the bridges made perfect sense. It takes away the lines of communication of the Russians. The Russians had prepared the bridges for detonation, so the Ukrainians would have taken them. If they hadn't talked about it. Now, it's easy for me to reference the German stream and my German channel, because there we talked about for months about potential counteroffensives. And I always said that this seems to be the most attractive offensive for the Ukrainians, as it allows them to basically end one front. The moment they reach the Dnieper, they have shortened their front line by immense amounts. They can take away reserves here. After the moment the Black Sea Fleet was taken out as a potential invasion force, as a potential amphibious force, taking the Dnieper River would have given the Ukrainians thousands, if not 15, 20,000 free soldiers they could use somewhere else. No other front line seemed to offer the same opportunity. So for me, this was the most obvious area for a Ukrainian attack. That the Ukrainians would think the same and that the Russians would recognize the same is more than likely. The reports I have and that I reported for 2 or 3 months is the fortification works the Russians were doing there. 3 lines of fortifications behind each other, defense in depth, prefabricated bunkers, everything ready to defend themselves, would indicate that this would be a slugfest no matter what. And I, in general, would have expected the Russians more or less to smell the invasion coming, even without the Ukrainians announcing it. On the other hand, here they didn't seem to see them coming. So would it have been easier? It might be. But this was one of the obvious targets. And actually, the other thing was, I said Kupiansk. It's nice to see that if I am right. So for me, it was Kupiansk and Kherson, because Kupiansk would mean Izium has to be given up. As I also said, I think in the breaking news at the beginning of the channel here, of the activity on the English-speaking channel. So those were two obvious areas of offensive in my book, which offer the highest gain, the highest potential gain, and that the Russians, at least in this regard, prepared it. And as said, Kherson has a much higher strategic importance than this area here, as this is close to impossible to return, whereas this is quite possible to return. I hope that answers it more or less. Do you think Ukraine is justified making attacks on Russian territory? Of course it is. I have no question that Ukraine is justified. This is a war. I think Ukraine, it would be interesting to talk to the... oh, nice, operator Starsky watching me. Hey, I watch your channel. Nice to see you here. So it would be interesting to talk to Ukrainian government or to the military leadership why they decide not to invade Russia themselves. They are at war. And they are allowed to act that way. And that means attacking Russian military targets within Russia is perfectly legal. Crossing the Russian border, taking the transportation hub of Belgorod would be perfectly legal, perfectly justified to. My expectation would be that that they don't want to give the Russians a reason to call the CSTO, because them crossing into Russia might be interpreted by Russia as an attack on Russia, and then they could call the Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan for help, and it would give the Russian government the justification to declare war. And the next thing is, obviously, Russian soldiers would likely fight more with higher morale for Belgorod than they would fight for something within Ukraine. What is the overall feeling of the Russian civilian population? Do they support the war effort? They actually do. Are they still misinformed? They actually do. There is an independent institute, a survey institute, I think is the English word for that, in Russia, which seems to be still fairly independent. And 70% of the Russians more or less support the war. The number of people willing to negotiate seems to be rising lately, but 70% of the population is supporting the war. That has to be acknowledged. So the vast majority of the Russians support the war effort. I wonder if the US or NATO has thought about buying MiGs from other countries and give them to Ukraine, even if they have to overpay the MiGs to get them. I'm pretty sure it's in the talks. There were rumors about maybe Cyprus handing over its T-80s. South Korea also has T-80s, which would also be theoretically an option. But I think the only MiGs the Ukrainians can actually use is MiG-29. MiG-21 might still be available plenty. But there's some doubt that the Ukrainians still have pilots able to fly them. And who has MiG-29 and is willing to hand them over? That's the big question. If we see the support they got is all out of NATO, there are tons of owners of T-72. The Indians have, 2,000-3,000? They have several thousand T-72. But the Indian, if you look at the equipment of the Indian armed forces, it's 80% more or less Russian. Their own industry, defense industry, has unfortunately more or less been a bad joke. What they produce themselves usually isn't wanted by their own military. They rather buy Russian stuff than their own because it's so bad. Whether it's the Arjun tank or the Tejas fighter, everything is the Indian don't get anything going. And for them to deliver weapons to the Ukrainians, the enemies of the Russian, would mean the Russians would likely stop any support of the Indian armed forces, which then would be pretty inoperable within months. And this is something that is a potential with all the other nations too. So what you need is Western nations that don't give a damn. Is that allowed to say in the US? That word, I don't know. I just said it. So they don't care much about Russian reaction if they hand over weapons. And that's mostly within NATO. And whether you could buy some Russian tanks all over the world. I mean, T-72 is one of the most popular tanks worldwide. But how many of those nations are willing to break relations with Russia? And if you see how few nations have actually supported sanctions, then the selection becomes pretty low. I would expect there to be an effort to buy that, but as we can see as of now, officially at least, it has not been successful. It's quite possible that there was some secret transfers, but that would be pure speculation. Do you think Iranian drones will make a difference? No. They are useful. The videos I've seen is that they actually have decent optics. So they are better. They actually seem to be better than Russian optics, but I guess it's for a reason that Russia isn't known for its drone exports. So will it make a difference? A small difference, yes, but those will not decide the war. The problem with the Iranian drones is they seem to be only able to operate in line of sight, as the Iranians don't have satellite support. So that limits their versatility massively compared to any other big producer of drones, or at least to most. So even their big drones that are supposedly copies of the Reaper and comparable drones will be far less capable because they should not be able to operate deep inside of Ukraine. Okay. Tough to fight a battle without bullets and troops on the Kherson front. As long as the HIMARS keeps blowing up ammo warehouses, attrition will rule out Russian success. That's true, but it seems that the supply situation isn't as dire yet, because we still have news about reinforcements coming in. And to send in reinforcements while the soldiers there are already starving would be suicidal. Now, it wouldn't be the first really bad decision by the Russians in this war, but you don't usually reinforce a pocket that is already weakened, at least if you can avoid it. And then they have the ferries, they have the pontoon bridges. Yes, they get blown up regularly, but there's still something getting through. And they started the war with, I think, 770 Mi-8. So in theory, they have more than enough helicopters to at least bring in grenades, bullets, and food. Of course, in reality, it's much more difficult because they have to land somewhere, they have to start somewhere, they have to be refueled somewhere. And if they are efficient, then it's within HIMARS range. It's more complicated than simply saying they have 700. I am well aware of that. But they have abilities to keep the supply rolling, at least to a certain degree. Now, what will be much more difficult is to getting tanks over, for instance. Now, the ferries are big enough to likely be able to carry a 45-ton tank, but the speed of it moving back and forth is fairly low. The ferry points are regularly attacked with long-range weapons, whether it's HIMARS or Excalibur. And the Ukrainians very likely still have people observing the ferry points, otherwise they wouldn't be able to hit the ferries. So supply should be an issue there, but I don't think we can expect them to starve and be out of bullets anytime soon. They are definitely weakened, and it's definitely an advantage for the Ukrainians, but it's not the decisive advantage. I would not see that here. What about the interview with Operator Sarsky? I mean, if he's here and probably following, I'm pretty sure we can get into contact and talk about maybe doing something together. That might be an interesting thing. What is your impression of Russian engineer corps capabilities in the theater? Not really my expertise, again. I could give some wide guesses and observations, but it's not something I'm too proficient in to... I think I would diminish the quality of this stream if I comment on every question like this. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that. Do you think Vasilivka in Ehodar should be a better target for a third offensive than Melitopol? Generally, a third offensive, if they are capable of it, should obviously try to weaken the western side, especially as it would help the currently running Kherson offensive. Whether it's Melitopol or Mariupol will be dependent, I guess, more on two things. I guess Ukrainian intelligence knowing where the troops are, and secondly, the infrastructure. Now, just looking on the map doesn't make it that easily. The Ukrainians will know which bridge is blown up, where a river is fordable in case a bridge is blown up, etc. So the distances might be more or less equal. That's 70 kilometers. And that's 75 kilometers. The distances might be more or less equal. That doesn't mean it's equally easy. Generally, it would obviously make sense to do the more easy offensive because it should affect Kherson either way. Melitopol probably more likely because, for instance, Berdyansk could no longer be used for resupply by ship. If Melitopol is taken, but it could still be used if Mariupol is taken. But more or less, it should be equal in importance. The question will be from the Ukrainian side, where it's easier to concentrate forces, where the advance is better, where the geography allows for more easy defense in the flanks. As said, an advance like this isn't just driving here. You need to fan out to the sides to protect your flanks so you don't get cut off, and those need room to maneuver, and they need to be strong enough, and ideally if they have like a ridge line that is more easy to defend, so that might be might need less troops as there is a ridge line here. Things like that, details like that make a difference. And Melitopol, for instance, we see the structure here that might make Russian defense more easy. All of this will play a role, but it's not that easy for me to judge because this is really looking at the maps, knowing the area, looking your own capabilities, and in those regards, I also lack some knowledge. Are you excited about Wagner recruiting 400,000 hardened criminals doing life in prison in Russia? I somehow doubt that they are going to recruit 400,000 hardened criminals. The criminals might have some advantage that they lack the moral restrictions that normal civilians do. It's well known that a lot of soldiers deliberately aim besides an opponent or close their eyes when they shoot, because shooting at a paper target, it's much different than actually shooting at a human and taking the decision to kill someone. That's a well-known problem, and a problem that's being addressed for decades now to increase the likelihood of soldiers actually trying to kill, which is actually, as cynical as it sounds, is a problem in war, that soldiers don't want to kill. Hardened criminals should have less of a problem like this. So they might actually be a little bit more effective in this regard. And if they get the same 1 month training that other volunteers, they might actually be more combat effective than the other volunteers. But I don't think it makes that much of a difference. I wonder if Russia finds a way to import necessary parts to build new long-range missiles, avoiding sanctions. There's the theory that China can supply a lot of it, but at the same time, the trade between both nations went down significantly, which would be an indication that while China itself doesn't sanction Russia, the Chinese companies in effect do. They are afraid of... the little terrorist is still throwing stuff around. I need to get the cat cam going so you can see the star of the show. So... The Chinese companies themselves seem to uphold some degree of embargo out of their own. Whether they are able to get the parts, unfortunately, my knowledge about the details where the optics come from is a little bit limited. You can substitute a lot, especially if you're willing to accept diminishing quality. If the CEP goes from 5 meters to 25, that might more or less still be okay, depending on the target you're aiming at. But it'll take time. You can't just take different stuff and stuff it in and expect it to work the same way. So they will be able to substitute to some degree. And if you, for instance, see that what the North Koreans still are able to produce in high-tech weaponry, which seems to be fairly decent, what the Iranians are capable of doing while being under sanctions, they will be able to smuggle something in. They will be able to buy from China, from North Korea, from Iran. So there are options for them to substitute, but it'll take time and it'll likely reduce the output and the quality, at least for the time being. I totally support of making the idea of making a video together. I'm sure I can learn a lot. I would really, we need to get in contact. If you're on Twitter, contact me at... Inclutus. I just wrote it in the chat. That's my Twitter handle. Contact me there and we get in touch. I think I got through the whole question line. Some viewers even came back after experiencing Panama. I am going to take a little zip to oil my throat, and then we can slowly come to an end with 2 or 3 more questions, maybe. We are, I don't even know, what time is it? We are at 2 hours now. Okay. What do you make about the push stalling around Lehman? Resupply or another push? Too strong defenses, choke point, shifting focus elsewhere, missed opportunity. To judge the slowed down offensive here, I can interpret it in various ways. Again, I only am available to talk about OSINT. So why would they slow down? I can offer you a few explanations. The Russian actually managed to set up a defense that stops them. Not too likely. I would be surprised if it was pure Russian power that stopped the Ukrainians here. Second option is they actually decided to take an operational pause, to resupply, get new ammo, fuel, get ready for the next push. And at the same time, we shouldn't forget there were thousands of Russian soldiers here, and not every one of those will have fled. If there are 200-300 Russian soldiers still in the hinterland roaming around with their rifles, that could be an issue. So rooting them out at that point before they become an issue might also be a reason. But I think they better get going fairly soon again before the Russians have stabilized their lines. Now about Liman. Liman seems to be fairly easy to defend because the Ukrainians were able to hold it for quite a while. It's not too small a town. When we see it here, it's actually quite a sizable town. And if the Russians decide to defend it, if they actually fight for it, it's house-to-house fighting, which means high losses, which takes time. You don't overrun a city that is seriously defended. So what might be the best interpretation would be the Ukrainians are currently doing a fixing action and try to encircle it, to try to go around. That would likely be the best decision. Fix as many Russian troops here as possible while they cross, I don't know, take from Ozerne, try to go north here somewhere, I don't know, encircle it. If they actually manage to make the Russians commit enough forces to stop them there and then cut those off, it would be almost a bigger victory than this part here, because it's one of my interpretations of this war. I don't think conquest of territory in itself decides this war. I think it's the destruction of enemy forces. Whether the Ukrainians, for the Ukrainian, this is a huge win, but it's not really that relevant. Of course, it eases their burden. It allows them to make a Russian offensive in the Donbas more difficult. It allows them maybe to attack some communication lines within Russia. It pushes Kharkiv out of the range of tube artillery. Stuff like this, all at an advantage, but it doesn't decide the war. What might decide the war would have been if they had caught the whole First Guard tank army there with their pants down, encircled them, and took them prisoners. Things like that, I think, will decide the war bigger than gaining a few square kilometers. Now, that's a big win, and I don't want to diminish it, but it's not a decisive win. A decisive win is to destroy thousands of enemy troops. And if the Ukrainians, I try to be as objective as possible. That's why especially this channel doesn't live that long yet. But the German channel, I mention Ukrainian war crimes whenever I face them, because I think objectiveness is required and requires you to also mention the crimes from the other side. That doesn't mean I'm neutral. I'm clearly on the Ukrainian side. I don't turn this into a secret at all. So from my pro-Ukrainian stance, that would be the most optimistic interpretation, that the Ukrainians deliberately just do a fixing action here to try to encircle it. I hope this is the case. We might see the result within the next week, but other than that, the easiest explanation is that it's house-to-house fighting and it simply takes time. Rather than attacking Melitopol and Mariupol, do you think securing nearby areas of villages near Volnovaka, Tokmak, and Polohi is a better idea? I don't think that's a decisive change. I only know Tokmak. The rest I need to look up. That's here. Polohi, is this here? Yeah. and Volono something. No, that's not here. I guess that's somewhere. I don't see any strategic game of the Ukrainians gaining this. That's no essential line of communication. If they cut the railway line here, Tokmak might be a juicy target, might be better than nothing, definitely better than nothing if they cut the rail line here. If this is actually the only rail line. Now I use this map and this map shows only the rail line here. Does this show a better? There might be more rail lines, but obviously cutting the lines of communication to the west helps, even if they don't cut every road. So Tokmak is a better target than nothing. I don't see much of a point in conquering this, and I don't know where the third town is. If you want to look for a decisive offensive, a defensive that really makes a difference, obviously Melitopol and Mariupol would be the targets. But again, whether the Ukrainians are strong for that, I still have my doubts at this very moment that they're actually able to run a third offensive at the same time. And yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Rather than, that we got that. Do you have any data on the actual size of the Ukrainian army? I don't believe it's million. The million was everyone in uniform. So that's euphemistic. It's a nice number. It's the same as the Russian 1 million army. Now, if you look at the comment sections, if you say anything positive about the Ukrainian armed forces, you will find somebody claiming, it's Russia is fighting with one arm on its back and they only committed 200,000 men and they have 2 million. I recently had one claiming they have 2 million because there was an article that Putin wants to increase the size to 2-point-something million. But the article said that half of those are civilians working for the armed forces. I wouldn't want to send secretaries to the front, to be perfectly honest. And the same with the rest of the armies. I made in the German, I need to do that in English too, 8 problems of the Russian armed forces. And one of them, as I identified, is that they try to be a superpower without having the means for it. So they run a naval force that is completely overblown for their means. They have railroad troops with 35,000 men. A lot of their armed forces, which might in theory be 1 million, is divided up in forces that cannot even fight. If the guys being on a frigate, on a submarine, you can't send them to Ukraine. I mean, you can, but that would be Germany, April 1945 style. That would be the last 2 weeks before the war ends. Then you use submarine crews to fight. So a lot of their forces, of the Russian forces, are not even ground forces, not even combat troops. And this will be in some way the same. So my understanding of that 1 million was it's basically everyone in uniform. That's police, border guards, territorial defense, everyone basically wearing a uniform. And when we're talking about this here, this border is not undefended. At the very least, there are territorial units here, training, probably still currently training, having anti-tank equipment, maybe a little bit of artillery to support them, older guns, etc. But you can expect on this line to be 20,000 men at the very least, along the Belarusian border. Along Transnistria will be some. So if you divide it up, it's not 1 million men ready to march march on the front line. It might be 1 million in total, and it's actually it was a little bit sobering. I would have expected more at this point. In the past, I expected the Ukrainian numbers to be higher at that point because they did a general mobilization and they officially didn't let any more men out of fighting age. Obviously, there will have been some corruption. There will have been some who had genuine reason to leave the country, but the human potential should be enough for 2 million. What is limiting them now is obviously equipment and mostly training, non-commissioned officers, etc. So 1 million in total seems reasonable if you consider every single one wearing a uniform, whether he's combat troops or not. How many combat troops? Again. And I'm pretty sure we will not really find that number because that should be secret. The Ukrainians better shouldn't publish that. Okay. I think Amar, my moderator, which is my girlfriend, has apparently fallen asleep. I don't see the last comment here. Anna, wake up. So Amar said Sorry about using the word undulations. I'm happy to learn new words. My English didn't. I didn't learn English as a child, so improving it doesn't hurt. I meant a winding river like the irregular sine wave. The total wave will lose energy against the banks or going on the bending, of course. And you would expect if it floods that it gets lower. And the other thing is it's spreading out. So the tip of it will move faster than the water further back. So you would expect it to move out. But that, how is it called? Again, I need to use the translation. Just to make sure. Flow physics is not really my expertise. So this is a question that needs to be pointed at somebody else. Okay, I think we've more or less done it. I'm happy that it's a new record for this channel at the very least. My German channel is still bigger, but that might change fairly soon. And my throat is already saying hello, so I think it is about time to call it a day for now. I'm happy that you were here. If you want to support the channel, you find opportunities, ways in the description. The channel isn't monetized yet, so you can't really use the usual Google, YouTube options. But if you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means of the description. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances. If you liked it, don't forget the bell button so you don't miss future videos. And of course, don't forget the like and leave a comment. The next live stream should be next Wednesday if everything, no, should be on Saturday, probably at the same time. So it should be 8 o'clock Eastern, if I'm not completely wrong, at least as long as their summertime on the East Coast. That was it. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. And as it was once suggested to me, and I think it might actually make sense to say that from now, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back.